Hey guys, this is Justin at the Survivor Review, and John Rambo is making his return later this month with Rambo Last Blood. So I'm going to take a look at the entire Rambo franchise, starting back with the first film from 1982, First Blood. Now when we think of Rambo, we think of, really over-the-top action franchise. Sylvester Stallone running around with his shirt off, shooting an unlimited amount of bullets and just crazy explosion stuff. But what's really interesting is First Blood is really not like that at all. It's actually a very different film than a lot of the later sequels. It's kind of like how when you look back at movies like Nightmare on Elm Street and how the first film in that series is different than the sequels it spawned. It's kind of like that. First Blood is actually a much more serious and a much more dramatic film. Well, it's still an action movie. There's still over-the-top action sequences and crazy stunts and explosions. But it takes its story very seriously, and a more dramatic side to it than how the series would eventually become. Because the movie begins with John Rambo. He's a Vietnam veteran. He's just, walking around. First thing in the movie, actually, is him going to meet up with one of his former army buddies, who turns out to be dead, actually. And so now he's just kind of walking, not really having a whole, goal in anything, just kind of making his way around. And he's walking through this city when this sheriff pulls up next to him. And the sheriff isn't taking kindly to him. Even though Rambo isn't, causing a scene or anything, he notices that he's very unkempt, long hair and everything, and he's a Vietnam vet, and he just thinks that he's going to cause trouble, that he's going to be a troublemaker. So, at first he picks him up, oh, here, I'll take you to where you need to go. And they have this, car ride, and everything seems to be calm. So Rambo asks, is there any place where I can get something to eat around here? And the sheriff's just oh, yeah, it's a good place 30 miles down that way. And it's well, what's wrong with right here? It's oh no, you don't want to be here. It's a small, boring town. And basically the sheriff drops him off, on the city limits. And just says, don't come in my town at all. And turns around and goes to drive off. Well, Rambo doesn't take any crap from him and turns right back around and walks back into the town. Sheriff sees him, picks him up and ends up arresting him. And brings him to the police station. You got this whole scene where the police are just jerks. This movie, all the police in this movie are just jerks. And, they're trying to, process him and everything. And he's getting these flashbacks to, Vietnam and everything. The guy has the razor and he's getting flashbacks to being, tortured in Vietnam and everything. He ends up, breaking free of all of them and running into the jungle. So the police are going after him and Rambo basically wages a one-man war against the police departments. So right off the bat, that's what differentiates this movie from the later sequels, because normally when you think of Rambo, you think of him running around Vietnam or, some other country or something like that, but there's not. There's no actual war going on in this movie. It kind of goes a metaphorical war going on, but there's no actual war going on, and it takes place, in the U.S., so there's no foreign territories or anything. So that's a really different pace from what the later sequels would do. And also this movie is a lot more serious in the way it kind of handles Rambo and his PTSD. He's not just a guy running around blowing people away. He's clearly a dude traumatized from what he went through in Vietnam. And there's a lot of that. Stallone's performance in this movie is fantastic. His performance is so great. From the earlier scenes where he's just really silent, and you can kind of see it in his eyes where he just wants to, just be let alone, He wants to just live his life, doesn't want to deal with anything. And then the scenes later on in the police station, where he's kind of silently protesting and not trying to do what they want him to do. But then also you get the moments where you see the fear in his eyes, when they're getting closer to him with the razor and stuff like that. And then you see later on when he's in the woods and he's building these traps and everything, and just see kind of the tactfulness and the determination that the character has. It's really good. This movie doesn't have any real cheap one-liners or any real cheesy moments. There's a couple bits here and there where there's comedy.
Don't look at me, look at the road. That's how accidents happen.
But aside from those little moments, the movie takes itself very seriously, and he's not running around spewing one-liners while he's killing bad guys or anything. Also, the action scenes in this movie are cool because they're not super over the top. Near the end, there's some explosions and stuff, and there's a gunfire and everything. But aside from that, Rambo never really uses a gun for the majority of the movie. And it's a lot of great traps and everything. There's this great scene where the whole police force is walking through the woods trying to find Rambo, and they just keep getting taken out by these traps that he keeps setting up, which kind of becomes a running thing in the Rambo movies. But it's done so well here, and it's so brutal whenever it happens. It's never super graphic or anything or super gory, but it's just like, it has that kind of gritty realness to it. That's the benefit of this being an 80s action movie. There's a lot of great practical and great like gritty like stunts and like effects and stuff like that. They're done really well and really well handled. There's some really good stuff in here, like with a helicopter that's chasing after him, because there's this cop, the like kind of like the meanest cop in the movie, the one who's was processing him and just like being a total like dick to him. Like he's chasing him in this helicopter. Like there's this great shot where Rambo's hiding behind a tree while the helicopter is down there kind of hovering around them. I thought that was just a really cool looking shot. So yeah, like there's a lot of great stuff in here, even though like the action scenes aren't the greatest or the most memorable. Like to be honest, like they're really good, they're really solid stuff. I feel like this movie isn't as remembered for like the action sequences as much as like the characters and kind of the story, because there's a lot of great characters in this movie. Like I said, John Rambo is great and Sylvester Stallone's performance is great. And then you have Colonel Troutman, who is the person who was in charge of Stallone when he was in Vietnam and everything, who basically trained him and made him this elite killer who was part of this elite group of like commandos and everything. And Richard Crenna does a great job with the part, even though his dialogue is a lot of kind of the same stuff. It's a lot of just him talking about how dangerous like Rambo is and how they're just out of their element.
You telling me that 200 men against your boy is a no-win situation for us?
You send that many, don't forget one thing.
What?
A good supply of body bags.
That's kind of what most of his dialogue is, but he does a really good job with the part, and he's very believable in the role, and I like his character a lot, and his character gets, you know, some more to do later on in the franchise, but I liked him here. Or you got Brian Dennehy as the sheriff, kind of the main, almost antagonist of the movie. He's really good just playing this like kind of like jerk kind of character who's really great. So all the acting is really good, a lot of really good characters. What makes this movie kind of unique compared to other action movies is that it doesn't have like a typical bad guy that the main character has to defeat, and even then the situation the main character is in is different than most action movies. And sure, you can say the sheriff is the bad guy, but he's not so much like a villain as much as he's just like an asshole, really, you know? So it's not your typical action movie where you have like this hero who has to defeat the bad guy and save the day. The hero this time is just this guy who's thrust into this terrible situation and basically has to fight his way out of it, you know, who really is in the wrong and everything. I thought that's very unique and a very interesting type of story compared to like what you normally see and kind of what the series would become, because the series, you know, does evolve into that, into a hero who has to defeat a bad guy and save like people and stuff like that. This movie's not that, and like I said, it takes itself seriously, and yeah, it has some cheesy moments, and there's some stuff, you know, so it doesn't quite hold up, and there's kind of some unrealistic bits, like Rambo jumping off of the waterfall and landing on all the tree branches and stuff, and he does get hurt, but he doesn't really get that hurt, and you watch the scene and you go, okay, he probably would have gotten a lot worse in that situation. So it still has some of that kind of 80s, like kind of like unrealistic like action stuff like that. But like I said, it plays itself very seriously, it plays it very straight, and it's kind of an action movie built on like really good performances and like a good story. It's not the most complex story, but it's a really good story. So the bulk of the movie is Rambo hiding out in the woods, trying to fight back against the police force, while the police force is trying to like corner him and defeat him. But then you get to the climax of the movie where Rambo gets a hold of all the firepower, and it's just this scene of him just running through the town, just like shooting it up and like destroying it, like basically turning this, you know, little small town into a war zone, you know? Basically it's Rambo's own personal war zone. And when you get to the ending, like the scene of the movie, because the climax of this movie, it culminates not in a typical action scene of like people fighting, but it culminates in an like, amazing monologue by Sylvester Stallone, because basically he corners the sheriff, is about to kill him, but then gets confronted by Troutman, who basically, you know, stops him and tells him that like he has to give himself up, that like, you know, everything is over. And then of course you get that monologue from Rambo.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!
And it's just Rambo breaking down, basically just saying how, like, you know, he fought for his country, you know, he didn't do anything wrong, but now he comes back home and everyone just hates him for no good reason. And it's so well acted and so emotional. It's just, it shows that Stallone, like, when he really tries, can be a really good actor. And it's a bummer that he kind of just relegates himself to, like, action films. Like, after Creed came out and he was, like, nominated for an Oscar, I really wanted him to turn himself to kind of do more, like, dramatic and more serious roles. but instead he kind of just went back to doing like action movie roles, and I wish he would do more of these type of parts because he pulls it off very well. You believe it. It's super emotional, and it's a great scene and such like a somber, like serious note to end the movie off on, because basically that's how it ends. It just ends with, you know, him breaking down and then him just giving himself up, and that's it. It's over. So not your typical kind of like action movie ending, but it works. It's very effective. Very different than the original ending of the movie because this movie is based off of a book. And in the novel, Rambo dies at the end. And the original ending for this film had Rambo dying, actually. Which would have, you know, changed a lot of things. This would be the only video I'd be doing if that was the original ending. But I'm glad that's not how it ended. Not just because we got the sequels and everything, but it works better. It would be like super depressing if it ended with him dying. It's this character who's been through all this stuff, is going through all this like emotional damage, and it ends with him dying. Like, it wouldn't really work. Like, I see what they're coming from, but it doesn't quite work, and I'm glad that they changed the ending to the way it is in the actual film. So First Blood is a great movie. It has a really good story, great characters, some good action, and a fantastic performance by Sylvester Stallone, which is one of his best performances ever, and one of his most iconic characters, of course. It's definitely worth checking out. Very different from what you'd expect from a Rambo movie, but still great nonetheless, and easily the best film in the franchise. A franchise of which didn't really need to happen. Like, this movie is a really good standalone film. It didn't really need sequels, because it's kind of like a good smaller movie, you know? But we got them anyway, and right away, once you get to the sequel, it goes from 1 to 100 in terms of craziness. So until then, I'll talk to you guys later.